So let me talk about the Community Preservation Act and not waste anybody else's time. Um, there's a basketball game some of us might want to see, and there's a hockey game coming up as well. So let's talk about the Community Preservation Act. And the Community Preservation Act, it was a brainchild of a man named Robert Durand, who was the Secretary of Environmental Affairs for the Republican governor, Paul Cellucci. Uh, and uh, Governor Cellucci was, like many of the Republicans of that era, was very, very interested in environmental issues and encouraged Secretary Durand to come up with an expansion of a land grant program that was first put in place down on the islands, where tax money could be diverted solely for the purpose of purchasing conservation land. And Robert Durand came up with the idea of adding on to this the idea of supporting historic properties as well. So in 2000, the state legislature passed the Community Preservation Act, and more importantly, um, the town of Easton in April of 2001 voted by a huge majority of 132 votes to accept the Community Preservation Act and then adopted the bylaw in June of that year. Okay. As of this year, the 20th anniversary of the CPA, 177 of the state's 351 cities and towns have adopted the CPA. Mostly in a band between 128 and 495. Um, Primarily because you need to have issues with. Could somebody please mute themselves? I keep getting all this static back there. Thank you. I can't hear myself think, which is.
Yeah, please mute everybody except for Ed. Okay.
And I'd be perfectly willing to mute myself, but that's okay.
Alan, Cindy, can
I'm on a cell phone. I don't have any buttons or anything to mute myself.
Ernie, that'd be great. Thank you. So for our speaker.
Okay. Yeah, I just don't need to hear the feedback in my head. So Easton adopted this very, very early on. And what the CPA does is provide money for the purchase of conservation land, preserving historic resources, whether they're buildings or historic documents, and creating or supporting affordable housing. Built into that conservation thing, and now given more importance after many, many years, was the idea of supporting outdoor recreation. And that is one of the things that has changed in the 20 years that I've been on the CPA committee. And we've done a lot of work with all four of these, as we'll see. In order to sell the CPA to the legislature, who likes to tell everybody what they like to do, and the CPA basically gives us here at the local level the option of spending money the way we feel it needs to be spent, not the way the Commonwealth feels it should be spent. But in order to sell it to the powers that be in Boston, they were told accurately that CPA would benefit the local economy by providing jobs in construction and economic growth. And then finally, and probably most important, CPA also supports our resources, which leads to a strong tourism industry. If you take a look at Main Street in Northeastern, which was an empty, boring place to be just as little as 10 years ago, it's now a vibrant, hard to get through area, mainly because there's a lot to see in Northeastern now due to the use of the CPA. So the CPA is funded by a tax. I hate taxes as much as everybody else. But the one thing to like about this tax money is you, the people of Easton, get to say how the money gets spent. Nobody is forcing you to spend money uh, due to a state mandate. In the school budget, you're stuck with paying for special ed, even though it's a state unpaid mandate. Here, with the Community Preservation Act, your money goes towards community projects. Easton was an early adopter of the Community Preservation Act, so we put a 3% surcharge on our property tax in order to buy into this program. And what that allows us to do is participate in the second and third rounds of funding, which is something that communities who did not go with the maximum surcharge can't do. So we put in a 3% surcharge on our property taxes, and the state has a trust fund which is filled up with registrations at the Registry of Deeds. If you sell properties, you pay for the registration, which 300 years ago was not such a good thing. That's a stamp tax, which is what our ancestors all revolted against. But basically, what's happened over the years since 2002, Easton taxpayers have contributed about $16 million in taxes, and the state has contributed about $8 million from the trust fund and from distributions of money from the general court. Um, what we also did here in Easton to make it a little bit fairer for people like me that are on a fixed income is exempt the first $100,000 of your valuation of residential property. And if you're an individual earning less than $67,000 a year, which is the low income level, I'm a high income person. I managed that by $1,000 last year. If you earn $60,000, $7,000 or less, like on a pension, you don't have to pay any money towards the Community Preservation Act. And there's also, if you have a family of four, the minimum there is $97,000 in income. So they try to make it a little bit fair. Um, if you're somebody in that earning bracket and haven't exempted yourself, you do have to go to the Board of Assessors and get the exemption. They're not going to give it to you voluntarily. So that's where the money comes from. And over 20 years, we've gotten approximately $1 million a year. Let me see. So how does this money get distributed? Well, there's a committee. There's 4 at-large members and a representative from the Conservation Commission, Historical Commission, Recreation Commission, Housing Authority, and the Planning Board. In Easton, the projects are initiated by members of the public or organizations or by town government itself. And then the CPA committee asks the relevant board to make recommendations on the proposals. I was going to say unfortunately, but fortunately, Easton has an affordable housing trust, and this has complicated the work of the CPA committee because we're supposed to fund the Affordable Housing Trust from the CPA fund. They have a bank account and we have a bank account. And the issue sometimes has become whose bank account do you want any money that isn't immediately being used to sit in? For example, right now, the Affordable Housing Trust has set aside $80,000 of its money for rental assistance for folks that are unemployed due to the COVID. And the CPA voted an additional $250,000 out of their money for rental assistance. So usually we work together. Okay. Once a program is, once a project is approved, it's overseen by the CPA committee, but generally managed by the appropriate commission. And we can have Rich talk about the Smith Farm project, uh, because there, once you get your money approved, there are certain rules you have to follow. In the case of a historic preservation job, you have to work on the um, basis of the Department of Interior standards, and that historical commission looks over that. So the way that the money is set up is that 5% is set aside for administrative needs, which we very, very seldom use. That also goes to appraisals of property if we're buying stuff. Then 10% gets given to conservation land, conservation projects, 10% to historical projects, and 10% to affordable housing. Recreation projects fall under conservation. The remaining 65 to 70% can go to any permissible project. Currently, the CPC is paying off debts from a number of projects, and it's maintaining a $4 million bank account because one of the things we're required to do is come up with a list of priority parcels of land in town that we would like to purchase. So we're holding on to money to um, buy those if they ever come on the market. There are rules about what you can do in the various categories, which I have a nice chart for that nobody can see. But basically, for you can't manage uh, open space properties, historic properties, or recreation properties with CPA funds. You can acquire properties, you can restore properties, and you can rehabilitate properties for the most part. Uh, the recreation area allows you to um, do rehabilitation on properties that were purchased with conservation CPA funds. So the good news for me and for you, because it will shorten the presentation, the CPC is working now on revising its application process, something that we've done often during the last 20 years, because we want to balance off the ease for which individuals and organizations like the Grange um, uh, need to do in order to request funds with our requirements to be fiscally responsible with the money. So right now we're trying to come up with a process where basically you get approved to go ahead, and then we will help you come up with a detailed proposal so that you don't have to spend any money initially, which is kind of what you have to do right now. So more on that later. Usually what happens is the application process begins in the fall and runs through until January. There's a preliminary hearing on proposals. Those proposals are then sent to the appropriate commission. And then once we get recommendations from those commissions, there's a final hearing at the CPC and a vote is taken, whether to recommend it or not. Once a proposal is finalized, it goes to the town meeting, and this is sometimes a bone of contention as well. The CPC under the legislation has the right to go from our approval to town meeting. We don't have to pass go and get the selectmen and the finance committee to approve it. We have always gotten selectmen approval for our projects, but there have been times when the finance committee did not recommend a CPC project. But we have a direct relationship with town meeting. But we also get, where possible, get a positive vote from the two big boards in town. So ultimately, the real control of this whole process rests with the community. So what have we done over the last 20 years? Well, conservation wise, there's been 11 projects, and you need to know that some of these things overlap. Um, for instance, we've bought over 250 acres of land, uh, and that includes 48 acres at Wheaton Farm, the Governor Ames Estate, which now has been transferred to the trustees of reservation, and 142 acres at the Gill property uh, on Depot Street. Money has been spent on trail improvements. We supported a Boy Scout project that would connect some of our trails in Northeastern to trails that go through to Borderland State Park. We added a parking lot on Bay Road, um, allegedly, let's say, for the community garden. But in reality, what we did was we moved the parking lot from the back of the property to the front of the property to make it more visible for police patrols, because there had been a lot of drug use going on in that rear parking lot. So that was stopped pretty much by that project. Um, Under recreation, there have been 16 projects. We helped support Alley's Park for Allie Hamilton, a former student of mine who was tragically killed in an automobile accident. This little park is down in Eastondale, and it's a wonderful example of the CPA providing funds. But the folks that managed that project also got donations from the community and put in a lot of sweat equity to make it work. And that's something we always look for when a project is proposed, that somebody has skin in the game. Keach Park up on Chestnut Street is a combined conservation project, practice fields, and a children's playground. And then if you uh, go to the corner of Center and Bridge Street, there's the Povis Pocket Park with a water fountain for your dog. We sponsored that again jointly with an individual who wanted to add something to his community. We also supported restoration of Frothingham Park and the Queesit Garden that Bill was talking about before the meeting. And then finally, because the rules have been liberalized a little bit, we have helped, under very strict restrictions, help with parts of the high school field projects, which you've seen going on. Under affordable housing, there have been 28 projects. We've bought land for Habitat for Humanity's homes, or donated land for Habitat Humanity's homes. We've supported projects by the May Institute, and the biggest project, of course, under affordable housing is the rescue of the shovel shop, which was the biggest and probably most significant of the projects. When this whole thing was being discussed way back in 2000 and 2001, the Conservation Commission was running all over town, building up support for the CPA. They believed that the Community Preservation Act would be used mostly for conservation land, as did, I think, most of the people who voted for it. In reality, however, what's happened is that the historical category has seen the most projects. And that was 41 different projects. So this is where I have beautiful pictures, which you can't see. The first one is that affordable housing project at the Ames Shovel Works, which was a hugely complicated financial arrangement that involved loans from the state, as well as loans from the CPA committee. It was controversial because we had never done anything that big before, and the money that we loaned out still has not been paid back, although we are getting interest payments on it annually. Um, but the project as itself gave us 113 units of affordable housing.
Oh,
And we're, and I'm not a big fan of apartments, but that particular apartment building really makes you think about the history of the community. You're living in the place where um, Bill's family made all that money, but where many of our families had folks who worked there for years and years. Um, there's also a mini park there, which doesn't get as much use as it should. And there's a whole bunch of historical artifacts like the bell that was used to call the factory workers there, and a piece of the giant water wheel, which was the last one being used in the factories in town. So for the amount of money we put in there, which will be paid back eventually, um, we did pretty well. That also has been an anchor for the um, increase in economic activity on Main Street. Other historical projects included from the start, uh, outside restoration of Unity Church. Um, we're not allowed to, under the rules of separation of church and state, to do any interior work on on a church, but we can help with exterior restoration because they're historical resources that people could see. So the church was interested in modernizing and rescuing their beautiful stained glass windows, which are of international importance. So we decided to help out with the outside structure. They spent over $500,000 just on the windows in there, as well as upgrading the heating systems and things like that. We put on a new slate roof. It turns out that slate roofs last about 100 years, and then you need to do something about them. So other projects have included helping out the library in a number of ways, a fire suppression system at Queeset House, for instance, roof work on the children's wing, and a couple of other projects, parking lot project as well. Oaks Ames Memorial Hall is an ongoing money pit. Uh, we estimate that the cost of fully restoring Oaks Ames Memorial Hall will cost about $7 million. And we're working with Bill's brother, Fred, and his board of directors to try to balance grants from outside sources with community preservation money, while at the same time doing emergency repairs where necessary. The other Richardson building that's received some money from the CPA is the Historical Commission's museum, Historical Society's museum at the Richardson Railroad Station. The Historical Society has never accepted money for physical restoration. What they did was they received money to do a fire suppression study, since most of the historical documents in the town are now stored at the Historical Society. Climate control and fire suppression are key. Other historical projects included helping out the Children's Museum with some work there. One of our earliest projects was the restoration of the rockery, all of which I had wonderful pictures of. So those are the categories we've
But
worked.
I think you could share now. I think I figured it out if you want to give it a shot.
Okay. How do I get rid of you? That's the question. You're blocking my view.
Oh, I am?
Yeah, it's not your fault. I think it's we're far enough into the process where I have Zoom open and my screen open, and
Okay, well, it's your call. It's your call.
yeah. Well, let's just finish it up. So the last thing I want to talk about, far be it from me to blow my own horn. Oh, by the way, yeah, the town hall is the other historic project where, despite the fact that many people feel that the town should be maintaining its buildings better than they actually are. We are involved in supporting the restoration of our town hall, which again, after 100 years needs a lot of exterior work in particular. Um, so if you have a slate roof, you might want to pay attention to it over the course of a century rather than wait to it to start to fall off at the end. But
Ed, I'd like to also ask you about the Smith Farm, because Rich Eastman, who's one of our members, of course, is very actively involved since it was his great-great-grandfather's property, and that's located inside Borderland.
yes.
So I think they've been helped also, haven't they?
Yes, and I'd like to save that for the very last thing to talk about, because it's nice to have a project proponent here. I want to talk about, before we finish, some things that unfortunately we weren't able to save or haven't been able to help, starting with our own Grange Hall. Our Grange Hall, which is not the loveliest building in the world, admittedly, sought funds for the restoration of the building back almost a decade ago now. And we were unable to get the support of the Historical Commission to do that. They established requirements, which we thought we had followed. Then when we got there and said, here's what we've done, they sort of moved the goalpost on us. So we were upset enough to try to go on our own without the restrictions of the Historical Commission and the goalpost changing. And $140,000 later, we're where we are now. So that was a disappointing finding there. Another project that we had funding for and were ready to go was the purchase of the Dean Mill, which was in back of where the car wash is on the junction of Washington and Depot Street. That was a long, hard slog. The proponent was not difficult to work with, but had a number of requirements. We had a deal all worked out, and then it had to be approved by the Board of Appeals. The Planning Department failed to tell the Historical Commission they needed to be at the meeting. The Conservation Commission objected to the final plan, and the building, the oldest commercial structure in Easton, was lost. It was demolished. Another unfortunate one fell afoul of the rules of the CPC. The town wanted to upgrade the Wheaton Farm barn. It's a barn. It was probably put up by the neighbors in a barn raising about 150 years ago, 175 years ago now, and was worked on for the longest time by the Friends of Wheaton Farm. It needs structural work. Unfortunately, because it's conservation land owned by the town, they had to follow bidding rules and structural engineering rules that a private homeowner might have been able to avoid. So the amount of money that was voted by the CPC committee was not enough to do the project, and the building sits there these days, not going forward. Another one, and I have two more, and then we'll let Rich get involved in this discussion, was the Evangelical Congregational Church. They needed a new roof, and the interpretation of the Historical Commission, I believe with the recommendation of the Mass Historical Commission, is that that roof had to be replaced with slate. They couldn't afford to do that. They wanted to replace the roof with imitation slate. The commission said, no, you have to use original materials, Department of Interior standards. Well, I was reading the Department of Interior standards this afternoon, and that's not true. So the poor people at the Congregational Church could have had their roof if the town was a little bit more aware of what the rules were. And then finally, right down the street from that Congregational Church, right across the street from our Civil War Memorial, is the Reed House, the oldest standing parsonage in town and the home of Olive Reed, who was one of the very first women in town to speak up for women's rights and take a lead in the anti-slavery movement. I'll be actually writing a story about her for a publication coming up next year. The Reed House has been decaying for a number of years. The out-of-town owner is difficult to work with. Way back when Ernie was actually looking into that property, we've had several people look at it before. The issue there is that it's a beautiful old house that's been allowed to go to ruin right on the busiest street in town. So it's not terribly attractive to a developer who wouldn't be allowed to knock it down and put something else up on the property. However, I learned also today in doing a little more research, the CPC committee actually has the right to take property by eminent domain, and which is something the town has been extremely cautious with in other areas. But I'm going to look into that a little bit more. Eminent domain means you take the property, which is very close to being a public nuisance because of its fire hazard possibility, and pay fair market value to the owner, whether he wants to sell it to you or not. And then at that point, it could be developed as apartments by the town for affordable housing. So those are projects we're still looking into. The Smith Farm project has been one that's been ongoing for a few years now. Smith Farm is on Borderlands State Park, and the state initiated a program several years ago where properties like that can be taken over by a person who is willing to fix the property up. So Smith Farm is being fixed up as a wonderful holistic health kind of a situation. We'll let Rich talk about that, and needs some finances to do that. So CPC voted those funds, and then poor Rich has had to balance, what he needs to get done for the projects he wants to run versus the historic rules of the Historic Commission. So Rich, why don't you step in here now?
Well, sure.
Talk a little bit about your project.
Am I on here? Does it work?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate some of the things that Ed said about Smith Farm kind of presented just kind of a problem or an issue with CPC, and they had in being that the fact that it was a state property, as opposed to a lot of the properties that have come down, been supported by CPC and the CPA law, that are truly, part of Easton, the Easton history. And you notice most of the properties really kind of center around the village area, historic area. This was kind of, we were kind of like out in the woods. We were on Borderlands State Park. There are still some CPC members that don't support us now simply because we are a state property, and they've made that point known, and I respect their opinions. It makes total sense to me. But because of what we're doing with the building, we're having programming out there that benefits veterans, first responders, and families in the community as well for these programs that we're having out there. They are an organized program in support of the community that people can take advantage of that wouldn't normally be able to do that or wouldn't normally have the wherewithal to do it. They can now come out to an area and be able to hold their events out there. When we get the house completed, then we'll be able to further lean in veterans and that sort of thing. We have some things going on now, but we're going to have more detailed and more in-depth programming available for them. Having that and being able to get that information out to the public was my first push, because like Ed said, the property has been there. The property has been under this curatorship for quite some time. It's been that way for, God, I don't know, long before I came on. And I came on about 4 years ago. And that was when I had met Carrie Chrisman online through Googling in my ancestor's name, and come to find out there was a farmhouse in Easton, and I didn't know it. So I got in touch with her and we set up a meeting, and next thing I knew, I was on the board. So anyway, in the past there, it's been my push to really get the public to know that this place is active, that something is happening out here. And when I first learned about CPA, I really did a lot of studying on it, called a lot of people to find out what would it take to help alleviate CPC's concerns about this being on state property, and how this is going to benefit the town. And fortunately, enough people on the committee saw the vision that we had. They saw the worth of it, to let go of some of those concerns that like Ed said, that they have the right to take a property by eminent domain. They wouldn't be able to do that with us. So we really have to perform. We have to honor, what the commitment that we've made to the community, because they can't take it. It belongs to the state. And that's where kind of the problem came in. It's a tough go. Anybody applying for funds is a tough go. I've found that there's no standard book out there, and you can try to seek help if you want. There's some help available, but you really have to know what you're doing. You have to be organized in your pursuit of this. Ask as many people as possible that have been through this before, to try to seek the funds and present your best case. It's CPCs, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ed, CPCs only use the CPA law as a basis. That they have, the three things that they need, or that they can satisfy: historic buildings, open space, and affordable housing. But it's up to each individual CPC as to how those funds are going to be spent. And for instance, I'll give you, for instance, that one thing that we pursued initially and failed with CPC was that we were going for the whole ball of wax. I think our first attempt was for about, I don't know, 260,000, and that included the interior. We made an agreement along the way that the town was not going, or the CPC was not going to cover the interior, because they weren't going to do the rehabilitation. They were concerned about the exterior in following guidelines set by the I can't remember, Ed, the group that you had mentioned that you follow.
Interior standards?
Yes.
Oh. Oh, it was? Okay.
Yeah, and we followed Easton Historical Commission's guidelines as well, and signed off on those. And we were fortunate in that aspect, in that we didn't have so many things to follow. They weren't that strict, because there frankly wasn't much there. Anybody that remembers Smith Farm about 9 or 10 years ago knew this place was falling on the ground, and there wasn't much there to save. But over the last 3 or 4 years, there have been a lot of advances. We've gone out and raised our own money to kickstart this thing. CPA has been successful and granted us 2 grants over the last couple of years. So it's moving forward to the point now where the exterior is just about finished. We're now raising funds for the septic and for the interior as well. But it is a complicated process, and it's a tough process, because one of the things I didn't hear Ed mention was that part of the funds that the way things used to be back in the day when they first started this was the state would match 1-to-1. You put in $1, you get back $1 from the state. And I think now it is forever. What is it, Ed? Now
It's between 20 and 25%.
okay, so basically 20 to 25 cents on the dollar. You're not getting much back from the state. Therefore, all that money, you used to raise $1 million, you'd have $2 million available. Not anymore. And that's where part of the budget problem has come in. And it's been very difficult. But we're grateful for
the other thing is what Lee Williams always calls opium, which is other people's money. So when people hear about opium, we've gotten a lot more grant requests over the years as well. So, and sometimes what we've tried to do is accommodate as many people as possible rather than say no to some and 100% to others.
Right.
You know how that is.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, we've been very grateful that we've gotten support we have from the town and from the CPC.
So it looks like the screen sharing is working now, so you can see all the projects I was talking about that didn't get funded. Now that we know how that works, I won't be so scared to X out the picture of our fearless leader that was on top of everything for me. I would be able to do slideshows again. Does anybody have any questions before we finish up?
I just want to ask a question. What's that top one? I can obviously recognize all the other buildings, but what's the orange roof one?
The orange roof one is the old Dean Mill. It was Landscape Center at the time that this picture was done. And white above the pink, the orange roof is the grain elevator, which is the only part of the building that still exists. That's in a historical commission member's barn right now.
Okay, but that was set way back. I always remember the Dean Oil and Coal depot there. So that was set back.
Yeah, they were both down there next to the river. It was a really interesting site. It's too bad it was lost because even at the shovel works, which was in operation until the 1950s, the water system at the Dean Mill was more easy to interpret and show to people than the one at the shovel works. But it's gone. You can't save everything. That's a mantra we have. The other mantra we have is no one's making any more land. So we try to buy as much of the land as possible.
Ed?
Yes.
My question is, not all communities have joined in the state project and assessing a surcharge for their residents. But the more the towns and cities that do join, the less money each individual town, including Easton, is going to get in return. Isn't that correct?
Well, yes and no. That's an interesting question. We were scared to death that when Boston adopted the CPC, that all the money would dry up. But what happens is that now with 177 communities involved in this, there's a lot more lobbying going on for additional funds. So what we've seen over the past few years is where the percentage has gone down. The state legislature has been loath to let that stand. So if there's a budget surplus, money tends to go into the CPC trust. So it's not as bad as we thought it was going to be. And don't forget that when you add a town, the registration fees at the registry of deeds for property in those towns goes into the trust fund as well. So, yeah.
So Ed, tell us, I think we have to wrap this up, but tell us, if you had your heart's desire, what sorts of projects currently would be of interest to you as a member of the committee to support?
Well, my house was built in 1955 and I need a paint job. So that would almost qualify historically. I would really sincerely like to save the Reed House because I think this Olive Reed woman is a significant person, not only in Easton's history, but in the history of the state. Um, and the Wheaton Farm barn definitely needs repairs. It's not going to fall down today or tomorrow, but it may fall down in a few years. Uh, there was a barn at the other property on Borderland that was put into this curatorship process that fell down before the curatorship took place. So we lost a barn up there. We don't want that to happen at Wheaton Farm. That's a really old barn. Um, I also am much in favor of open space, purchasing open space, because it turns out that despite what they tell you about new growth at town meeting, we need new growth, we need new growth. It's sort of like Swifty, the bunny that runs just ahead of the greyhounds. For every house residence that goes into Easton, it takes in about 1.1 times in services what it pays out in taxes. So we just got a gift from the state for meeting our affordable housing standards, which sort of covers over the fact that some of this new residential growth in the long run is not going to add to our tax base. So every house you can stop, I think, is a positive. You can't do that anymore because for every house that's built, we need an affordable house under state mandate. So there's always pressure to build, which leads to apartments. And I think there's a huge difference between apartments like the Shovel Works, which really draw you into the community, and ones like Avalon, which seem more like a people warehouse rather than a part of our community.
Ed, couldn't the CPC think about purchasing existing houses for affordable housing and renovating them?
One of the things that we do with the CPC is periodically fund studies in the areas that we're looking at. And we funded an affordable housing study, and that was suggested to them. It's not a very given the price of even derelict houses like mine. It's not a very efficient process of meeting standards. Yes, we'd like to do that. Yes, one of the mandates that we have is providing funds for seniors so that they can stay in an affordable house. But as far as meeting standards, when you're building 10 new houses, you have to keep going. You have to keep making more affordable houses. And I'm 100% in favor of affordable houses. You need teachers to be able to live in the town where they teach. And you need to have a diverse community, which was always a positive thing in the towns that I taught in. So we don't want to lose that, but at the same time, we don't want to remove the character of our town. So it's sometimes antithetical to the purposes of the CPA. And there's a hockey game on, which just started. It's nothing. And
I think Cindy has a question, Ed.
Oh, okay, Cindy.
No, I don't. I was just going to agree with Ed as far as saving open spaces and not, having more building.
Yes. Now, isn't it true that 38% of Easton is in land which has been conserved and preserved?
It's not all public land, but yes, that's about right. And
Okay.
and you've heard the story, about the land boom in Florida in the 1920s, where everybody got to buy a piece of swamp. Well, a lot of our conservation land is unbuildable land anyway.
Right.
Okay. Thank you, Ed, so very much. And Bill, you want to wrap it up?
A great job, Ed. Thank you so much. especially for putting together the presentation. Sorry about I've only figured out halfway through how to make sure the share got back to the participants in the meeting, so my
Oh,
apologies.
no, we learn as we go, and these meetings get better all the time, so that's fine.
Thank you. Yeah, I think they definitely do. And so I don't know if there's any other comments. It's great to see such a nice crowd here tonight. Certainly, Ed, it's a story about the Easton community preservation and all that sort of thing is a fascinating story. It's just had such a huge impact on certainly historic preservation, no doubt about that, but these other areas too,
Right.
purchasing land. And so one of the really amazing, when I first moved here in the mid 90s, we looked at these buildings and everything, and everybody said, my gosh, how can we possibly raise enough money? But then along came the Community Preservation Act and the committee, and like a big team out there making this wheel turn forward. So I think when you look at the downtown village of Northeastern, you sort of see one of the real positive results, the glow effect of that hard money that's been able to be invested thanks to that act. So anyhow, thank you all for being here tonight. Is there anybody want to add a comment or two?
Could I say one thing?
Yeah, sure.
We didn't have enough time to speak of it, but could we maybe put like first agenda next meeting to speak about the Tower Gardens?
Yeah, we'll know more about where the Tower Gardens are located by the next meeting. I'm going in Wednesday to double check the one at the Thrift, and then I'm going to follow up with Center School and Parkview. So,
Okay,
Yeah, that's
That's
good.
great.
Lisa. Definitely want to, it'd be a nice initiative, sort of resurrect that thing, and thanks to Zoom capabilities, I think maybe it'll be even better this time around. So thank you very much. Any other comments? And have a great month. We'll be in touch, certainly, and your officers will be on the job, as always. The president of Grange now, Bill Ames. And no longer the worthy master. I'm crushed. So. But anyhow, bye everybody, and have a great month, and we'll talk to you soon. We'll be in touch.
bye.
Bye,
Bye.
Bye-bye.
everybody.
Thanks, Ed.
Stay safe.